But what does business make of the announcements so far? Well, joining me at the desk, Business Council of Australia CEO Jennifer Westacott. Jennifer, great to have you in.
Thanks very much.
Now, can I go to the US first?
Sure.
Because there was quite a lot of sort of business meetings announced on the sidelines.
Yep.
We had Mike Pence here talking about the cross investment. How important is it, do you think?
Oh, I think both the side events and just getting the relationship firmed up is absolutely crucial economically, strategically. I mean, people often forget America is still the largest investor in Australia, and it's still the biggest destination for investment from Australia. It's a hugely important relationship. So it's important that we have those business-to-business relationships, those strong government relationships, and this is why, as you know, we've been emphasising that, if Donald Trump changes his corporate tax rate, Australia is going to have to move pretty quickly to change theirs, because it will see an enormous amount of investment sucked out of Australia.
Do you think there'll be a big conversation about that at all between the leaders? Because I know it's Richard Goyder, of course, he's just coming off as at Wesfarmers there. He chose his farewell to talk about the importance of tax cuts if Donald Trump does go ahead.
Well, I hope they do talk about it. They've obviously got a crammed and busy schedule, but I think both of them, are committed to making the business community strong and making the business community kind of lead, I guess in Donald Trump's case, lead the economic renewal of the United States and the importance of an attractive destination for investment. I mean, Richard's points are the points we've been making as the Business Council for many years now.
Crucial that those cuts are actually sitting in the budget going across the forward.
Absolutely, and the government's committed to that, and that's fantastic, and we commend the government for that.
Do you think they'll have an easier time trying to convince, I mean, given that other things seem to be moving a bit?
Look, I hope so, because I think everyone said they couldn't get what they got through, the 50 million. Everyone said they won't get anything through, and they did, and that was, the very effective negotiation of the Treasurer, of the Finance Minister, of the Prime Minister, very practical, sensible negotiation. And I think the realisation by the crossbenchers that it is business that drives the country forward. It is business that generates jobs. It is business that can get the country moving.
And we need some wages growth, though, don't we? We need to see
absolutely, we do. And I think people forget the connection between wages growth and investment. I mean, the only way you can get wages to go up, unless you get a terms of trade hit, which you can't always predict or control, is if you get productivity to go up. And the only way you can get productivity to go up is if you invest.
All right, let's go more broadly to the budget. We've had these big announcements around education and also on infrastructure. What do you make of the budget so far?
Yeah. Look, I think let's take the education ones first. I think these are clever announcements, and I think they're very well thought through. If you take the higher education announcements, I think after the 2014 budget, leaving aside all of the politics around that, everybody by and large agreed that the funding to higher education was unsustainable in its current design. And so what we've seen the government do this week is the sort of thing we have been calling for: redesign the big programs of spending, make it more sustainable, target it more effectively, but of course keep the safety net where no one will have to pay upfront fees. So this is...
But you're talking about a sort of repurposing rather than going out and spending or having lots of black holes.
Exactly, or doing huge cuts. So this is a repurposing, and it's a very careful one. On the Gonski 2.0, I think
that's 18 bill.
That's a lot of money, and of course that is about liberating the money that was part of these deals for the non-government schools, where you can see in the newspapers in the Australian, some of the kind of overfunding of many of these schools. Now, we've been saying for years, I've been saying for a long time, that if you want to move to a full needs-based funding, and which is what David Gonski was proposing, the idea that no money can ever move from one school to another, it just doesn't work like that unless you're really prepared to spend unsustainable levels of money. What I'm hoping that the government has been able to achieve is that we can now focus on what matters in education, which is teacher quality, curriculum, different ways of teaching young people, the whole STEM initiative, principal autonomy, because we've had a very, very, as I'm sure you'd agree, unproductive discussion about...
Well, more the pointy end, rather, I mean, as Michelle Simmons would talk to.
Absolutely, what matters.
Okay, so let's talk about the big idea around infrastructure. A lot going on there in that space.
Look, I think the Badgerys Creek announcement is a very sensible one. I mean,
You've worked on that.
I did. I sat on the panel that advised the government, the previous government, about Sydney's aviation needs and recommended Badgerys Creek. This is a transformative project for Australia. No one should underestimate. This is a big nation-building project, and sometimes governments have to take the risk, particularly early on.
Well, I was going to ask you, because here you are representing big business. Sydney Airport Group have said, no, too much risk, we can't get a return out of that.
Yeah, but we know this throughout of our history, that governments often take the risk in these big projects, and they take them early on. What you want to see, of course, is that as assets mature, they return to the private sector. But government has got an enormous coordination exercise here. This is a very big project.
So I was speaking to Brendan Lyon at the Infrastructure Partnerships Australia. Now, he was saying to me this week that he's worried about the financing of all of this, all this sort of the government's new financing unit, there's off-balance sheet financing, ideas of value capture. He said, no, look at the Victorian budget if you want to look at how infrastructure should be funded through asset recycling, properly done through the Melbourne ports. Should we be concerned about how this is going to be funded?
I think it'll come down to on a project-by-project basis. I think the Badgerys Creek one is really about government going in early, as it has in the past, taking risk. One of the things I want to see on the Badgerys Creek is a effective governance, like set up a sort of some kind of coordinating body that's commercially focused, that's got commercial people
because presumably the idea of value capture to finance around that would be enormous if you get it right.
And that can't be done within the kind of, the halls of the public service. I think they should create a special purpose vehicle to run Badgerys Creek. Other projects, well, let's see if they stack up.
So the Inland Rail?
Well, look, these are these very hard projects, and I'm not sure the Harbour Bridge would have passed a cost-benefit analysis.
Yeah.
But having said that, it shouldn't excuse the need for an effective business case, transparent business case.
But this presumably ties in with the soft commodity boom and the whole idea.
And I do think, though, we need to see kind of a very detailed business case, because that's what we never saw for the NBN.
Well, there is the public, largely public, the ARTC, and there is another private offering in National Trunk Rail. So are we going to see a fair, look at both of those?
You would hope so. You would hope that we assess both of those proposals, because if one is marginal, two would definitely be marginal. So, we need to, of course, assess why the private sector bid isn't as good as the government's, doesn't achieve the kind of rates of return.
Do you think that's the case?
Well, I don't know. I haven't seen the detail of them. But, I mean, surely as a principle, we should always say, look, wherever we can avoid spending the taxpayers' money, we should.
Jennifer, good debt, bad debt. What do you feel about that?
Look, debt is debt, and the ratings agencies are very clear that they look at the quantity of debt, not the quality of debt. It has to be paid back. We need to assess it in terms of the risk it places on the budget. It has to be, the whole kind of question of, the kind of annual interest bill. It doesn't differentiate between types of debt.
But this idea of off-balance sheet, Jennifer, I mean, I've said it before this week, the NBN had certain returns that it had to make in order for it to be allowed to be off-balance sheet. Now, it hasn't made those returns. It should be on the budget, but obviously no one's going to put it there, are they?
I mean, it doesn't... The thing I'm concerned about with this, so I think, is that we don't create a new Don't Look Over Here folder where somehow it's sort of free money. It's not free money.
So how do the credit agencies look at this? Well, presumably that's why the budget is how it is, so that we can keep our AAA.
Well, they make it very clear that they're very alive to governments doing this. They make it very clear they're looking at the quantum of debt overall, the capacity to return it.
So that includes the off-balance sheet.
Yeah, that's my understanding from looking into what they've said. Look, I think the bottom line is, what the Treasurer is saying is we've got to make sure we're spending it on the things that create a better economic future, not spending it on things that are really about the kind of weekly household bills. But, having said that, we should not be unleashing a free-for-all, because ultimately you still have to pay it back.
Lastly, you mentioned about the politicisation of the hockey budget. Can we draw a line here and possibly looking at the housing affordability side of it as well, which of course...
Look, I think we should, and I think one of the things I'd like to see as a kind of drawing the line in this budget is that we get out of the gridlock that we've been in with the Senate. Because the consequences of failing to get the budget back into surplus, failing to get quality spending, they are going to be borne by the taxpayers at very high levels.
So the idea is today, for instance, that Michael Sukkar was talking about pre-tax, perhaps putting pre-tax income for first home buyers towards deposits and that sort of thing?
Well, let's have a look at those. The only issue with some of these things is it's another demand side measure. I mean, housing affordability you know, is a complex kind of demand supply side. If you just do, as we've seen in the past, the things on the demand side, i.e. make it easier for more and more people to buy a house, and you don't get the states to do something on the supply side, release more land, give more building approvals, you don't end up solving the problem for the people you really need to solve it for.
That's a curly one. We'll have to wait for the budget for that one, I think. Jennifer Westacott, thank you very much for coming in.
Thanks very much.